All right. Hello, everybody. It is 8:22 p.m. on a Wednesday night, Valentine's Day. I hope everyone is doing well. This is Palantir Deep Dives. Now, I know we haven't done this show in a long time. It's been almost 3 weeks. And the reason for that is because obviously Palantir earnings have been crazy. And, we've been kind of live streaming every single day when it came to earnings. So we haven't been able to actually do an episode of these, but this is a real show. And this show is essentially where I take one topic around Palantir and interact with that topic, analyze that topic, try to understand that topic in a deeper way. And it has to do with Palantir. So it is different from my daily Palantir. The screen is falling off a little bit. It's different from my daily Palantir show where I kind of, sum up the news of stuff. This is more of a live stream where we just talk about one thing in depth. KARP dropped a new interview at the same summit that Jensen Huang was at. It's about disinformation and AI, the world's government summit. I thought it looked really exciting. I haven't watched it yet. So if you haven't watched it, you'll be live reacting it with me. And we'll listen to it for 20 minutes and then react for about 20 minutes and see what he has to say. If I hear something in the middle, I'll stop it and give my thoughts as well. So this should be good. You're having a little bit of a lag. Let me make sure real quick on my side the stream is good. Let me make sure. Okay, should be good now. Should be good. I think it should be good. Cool. Okay, real quick before we start, dailypalantir.substack.com. We are literally, how many subscribers? 15 subscribers away from 3,000 on this bad boy. 3,000 subs away. Sorry, 11. Let me show you guys this thing right here. We are 11 subscribers away right here. You see how this is 2,989? We are 11 away from 3K. So if you want to subscribe to that, please make sure to subscribe. You get a Substack every single night and a newsletter talking about Palantir. All right, here we go. Palantir CEO Alex KARP. Let's get into it on disinformation and AI.
You, Alex, when it comes to big data analysis, few companies have tracked the sort of path that Palantir has done, which employs its technology to solve problems of national security, military tactics. Former CIA Director David Petraeus has described your company as transformative in its impact on counterterrorism. For those who don't know, and I'm sure most of you do here, but for those who don't, this was co-founded, 2003, some 20 years ago, by yourself and Peter Thiel. Given much of the work that you do is with government and consequently is somewhat shrouded in secrecy, I think Palantir is at once seen as a fascinating company and at the same time quite frightening, but certainly a company that is full of intrigue. So I'm absolutely delighted to get this opportunity with you today. Let's start with a very simple question. When, to your mind, would you stick in a pin in the map of sort of emerging technologies and say AI arrived? When was that?
It captured the public imagination with large language models. And then because of precursor technologies we built, we had a huge advantage. And that's why the US commercial market for us is a bonanza. But there's a lot of counterintuitive things about this revolution. But in fact, it's almost all counterintuitive. Which is why it's so confusing for most people. But one of them is the starting point of it is not the starting point people realize. And then on the winners, losers, it's just very different than any other revolution. And that's why it has to be approached in a way that is with fresh eyes.
So let's talk about the winners and losers as you see them now, because that will help us perhaps sort of debunk some of the perhaps confusion that people have.
Part of the confusion is purposeful because U.S. tech is the dominant player, and in the U.S. context, they don't want anyone to know because, if you're the only people getting rich, you kind of try to hide that. Then I definitely view this country as it's very counterintuitive to the word. I'd say the U.S. Emirates are U.S. because of a lot of the technologies are built there. But if you wanted to just do a simple diagnostic of who's going to win and who's going to lose, take this conference, print out the agenda and the people who attended, and measure every other conference against this. And what you'll see is, just a minute, they had the right people, they had the right topics, they had the right weighting of topics, they had the right understanding of the issues. Even there, this just shows you this is an expression of an underlying understanding of what the technology is. And that is inconceivably valuable in a world where very, very few people understand what the outlines of what large language models are, what they can do, what they can't do. Then in America, we have the problem that this is a revolution that will raise GDP, but at the same time, the relative delta between the poor and the rich is going to get even greater. Right. So that's something no one wants to talk about. Then you have the problem, say in continental Europe, where you're basically pretending the revolution isn't happening because it's the providers aren't from there. And then you have a culture like this one where you have a small number of people. It's much easier who are very technical. And then the whole issue of this isn't going to really help everyone as much as it will help a small group of people. That's not a problem.
So you have identified, as we start to look at winners and losers, you've identified the US and the Emirates. And I know you're not doing that because we're sitting here. I mean, you've clearly defined why it is.
No, I view one of my smarter decisions as investing here over a long period of time, primarily with my own energies and with our office. But this is a revolution where small beats big. So, and that's what you saw on the battlefield. That's what you see. Small, smart, already in tech, outperformed large, not as smart, basically. Where smart here means knowledgeable. But this is basically that times 1,000.
So you predicted, and I think it was just last month at Davos, that within a decade, around 95% of the world's top tech companies will be American, due to what you describe as the US lead in AI. So let's just be very clear about what it is that positions the US.
Well, it's currently like 84% of the top 50 companies, but that's purely, yeah. So, look, it's very hard to explain why these things work, why they do, why they don't. But the simple thing is, it's the large language model, even technically, it pen tests means it is actually putting pressure on your enterprise, on your culture, and the stronger and more robust your product already is, that's the unfairness of it. It's like if your product is already strong, if your culture is already strong, if your society is already strong, you leapfrog. It very much exposes weak products, weaker institutions, lies in your institutions, thinness in your institution to make a large language model actually work in a consumer environment. So like we power almost 20% of hospitals in the US. 2 years ago, we powered almost none. And it's because you need to be able to interact with the large language model without exposing your data, provide tooling to it so it's no longer a genius idiot, so you can task it with things while being able to constrict where it has access to and where the access control model, meaning who gets to decide, is not eviscerated. And so these are all things you would already need in an enterprise, just very few enterprises have them. And it's very similar culturally. If your people are technical and educated and loyal, you can build on top of that base and you just go like this. And then you have just, again, the inequality of all of it, which is very hard for people to accept. But that's an inequality defined in a way that is historically maybe not as relevant.
Well, there are implications, of course, for nations that don't have access to the same level of technology. How can we strike a balance in embracing the innovation of artificial intelligence and establishing regulations that ensure privacy, security, ethical considerations, and equity at the end of the day? Or are you saying that it doesn't matter?
I'm interested in people that are aligned with America and people who run just and wonderful societies win.
Hmm.
So there's the balance side of it. That's what we're taught to believe. I'm not interested in balance. I'm interested in winners, the winners winning.
Hmm.
Then there's the equity side of it. It's like, how do you deal with it in America? The obvious reality that while GDP will grow, the people who are in this business are going to be 10, 100 times wealthier. And that's very hard to explain to a society. How do you build partnerships on the defense side with allies where you share the IP we've built and they can build on top of it, which we're doing. So we're giving to allies or selling to allies infrastructure that will allow them to use AI that they built. So there are ways to share in the proceeds and in the actual benefits, but I don't think the idea that everyone wins is it all going to work, and I'm definitely not part of that view.
What does the commercial space look like for you, and what are you taking from the work that you have done, which has to date been majority government led, into the commercial domain? I just want this audience to get a real sense of where you see the opportunities.
It was historically commercial until about 2 years ago. And now, like, certainly if you do customer numbers, it's primarily commercially led in the US. And what I'm learning is, you can, like, there's just a lot of products out there that it's poetry. Like, you just get poetry. So, and people doing all sorts of PowerPoints. But if you show up to customers, I go all over America and I say, take all your best products, everything you've done, any vendor, and then compare it to what you can do in Palantir in 10 hours. And you're basically comparing, it's unfair because you're comparing a poetry on I want to task a satellite to tell me when weather conditions are going to affect my agricultural product. I want to task my enterprise to tell me when churn is likely to happen under these contexts. I want to be able to have a right function in this part of my enterprise. I'm interested in margins, or in the hospital context, I want to more efficiently allocate and more justly allocate beds. I want to make sure that doesn't happen on class, race, background. I want to get nurses and doctors involved, and then the margins are completely different. You can do this within weeks. And so then the use case I'm most excited about in commercial is you can take culturally specific manufacturing. So we power a battery company from Japan in America. So you can build the factory like it was built in Japan. You can teach workers and manage those workers and have them manage production as if they were Japanese workers, but with a cultural identity, in this case American, could be Emirati. So de facto, you can now build things that could only be built in one culture in another culture. And so this has incredible, almost incomprehensible impact on cultures, because now it's like, well, we could only build ships in the past in this one culture. Yeah, but now you can build them in Kansas City, and you can build them with workers who are not as technical, and you can do this. So that alone changes the GDP of cultures. It changes the ability of cultures to invest and do things that were not possible in the past.
There is some authentic concern out there, which I wonder whether you sympathize with, empathize with, have any consideration for the risks of outsourcing data analysis and decision making based on data analysis to a machine algorithm. Do you see a risk in us ceding decision-making control to large, powerful AI models who, of course, while smart, are not human?
Look, there's the general risk of what happens when the computer takes over. Then there's the intermediate risk, which is what you're talking about. But again, the risk you've outlined is architecturally controllable. Your enterprise, for example, our product, will allow you to granularly control what things are controlled by the computer, what things are controlled by algorithms. There's something in software called a right function, meaning who gets to have the decision. This can be controlled down to this individual, sub-individual in this role, but you need the right products to do it. And so a lot of not all, but a lot of the concerns in this area are because your software is software that was built for a world that was non-disjointed, peaceful, where your software product was primarily sales, where you did not have an enterprise where software and software-defined products, both the military and commercial, powered to some extent by AI, where that was not the case. And so one of the big problems with reducing everything to a moral discussion is, in many cases, the moral discussion is actually masks intellectual and commercial engineering ineptitude. So it's like these are engineering problems.
So is this about messaging then? Is this about communicating?
No, it's about the engineering actually working. It's not a messaging problem. It's like, and that's again why a small culture, whether Silicon Valley or the Emirates, massively outperforms a larger culture, because there are moral and equity issues here, no doubt. But a lot of the issues we pretend are moral are actually engineering. Who controls the AI? Under what conditions can it write to something? What kind of decisions can be made on the battlefield? Who gets to decide between life and death is very similar, not morally, not intellectually, but technically. Who controls where the satellite flies? Who tasks the satellite? Is it a human? Is it a computer? Under what conditions?
Who should it be?
Well, there's a lot. It depends the context. So, if you're running a massive agricultural arm, you probably want the business person to say, I want to expend this amount of resources on satellite coverage in return. That's not a moral decision. It's a competence decision. If you make it incorrectly, you will be defeated by the person installing a better product.
You were very bullish about the States. You've said that you see that as the US with regard tech as a winner going forward. You've name checked the Emirates, and you've been not so enthusiastic about Europe, for example.
Well, I spent half my life. I want Europe to win.
Right.
We need to admit, the first step in winning is recognizing where you're at. And so, you have to,
Yeah. Can I then just stop, because you've been very bullish about the States, and yet you and your longtime deputy, Nicholas Zamiska, writing a new book, The Technological Republic, it promises to be a sweeping indictment of Silicon Valley, as I understand it. And you've talked about Silicon Valley having lost its way.
Well, that's lost its moral way. But the primary mistake Silicon Valley makes is that, because the obvious truth that a lot of the high quality revenue of the world is going to flow to Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley has decided to obfuscate that by embracing the thinnest, most obvious half-lies ever produced, that are only there to make you feel comfortable at the fact you're losing, while they migrate all high quality revenue to.
Just explain what you mean by that.
Let's pretend we're doing nothing bad while running while running companies that reduce your intellectual acuity down to some kind of fake affiliation to which you don't belong. I mean, it's like over and over and over and over again. But the more important thing to understand is, it is a way of explaining to the world, I win, you lose, but you get to pretend you're happy because you get to participate in an ideology that doesn't work. And again, if you can, what the book is actually about, and it's not that really, it's how do you raise a civilization where people have an ability to repel these obvious half-lies? And there are many ways to do it. One way is to have enormous internal integrity in your culture, like the Emirates. Another way to do it is to teach classic liberalism or embrace religious backgrounds. The way we've done it, the way we're doing it in our elite culture, is the haves convince the almost haves that they're participating in something they're not participating in. And by the way, this has massive technical consequences, because then the leaders embrace things that will never work technically, because they feel like the thin ideology that they've embraced will also work technically, when in fact you have to go very deep to understand the actual underpinnings of an enterprise of technical products and how they work.
This is very complicated, what he's talking about right now. It's not easy to understand. Even I, who have listened to KARP a lot of times, I'm taking notes on this, trying to understand this. So I'm going to break it down after to the best that I can. But what he's making is a very specific argument that's not that easy to fully grasp. And I don't think this example is necessarily the best from KARP. So I'll see if I can give an example that kind of makes sense of it. I think he's really talking about the Harvard professor saying that it's okay to do a genocide. I think that's what he's trying to get at here, but we'll talk about it in a second.
And it's that laziness, that the comfort with laziness, that will undermine your company, your culture, your society, and everybody who's interested in full alignment with their company, culture, and society has to find a way to fight against it. And that's what it's actually about. And that's what you see in all modesty, in our products. They're metaphors for fighting back against that.
You are a warrior for Western values, for democracy. Democracy around the world is under attack. I mean, we face what are ostensibly
the primary thing that is eviscerating democracy. It's always produced as like, I'm not against fighting fake things. It's, you have to fix actual problems. Democracy is not an excuse for having nothing that works. If it does not work, nobody is going to buy into it. And one of the most important things we have to push back on is, oh, it can't work because we have these 5 things that don't work. Nobody has time for that. We are in very dangerous times. Every part of your society actually has to work. How do you define work? I put in $1, I get more than $1 out. That's working. It's not working. And the people who purvey that massively underestimate the intelligence of the people they're talking to. People have no time for that. And if you're spending time on this, it's, we invest lots and nothing happened, and we invest more and nothing happened. It's not the input, it's the output. And it's like we need a relentless focus on that across the world. And that is the only thing that will stabilize a society. And everything else just malfunctions, misfunctions, corrodes your society, and produces the worst people ever, because only the people who use that to advance themselves understand it doesn't work, and they understand they can manipulate people like that. It has to be fought against at every element. And
to that point, Alex, I just want to close with this, because I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this. There are growing concerns about AI's role in the sort of disruption that we see around the world at present. False and misleading information fueled by AI was top of the global risks report released at Davos this year. Do you share these concerns? It was at the top of a lot of people's
top
list.
of a list of. I compare this conference to that conference. I don't want to get, it's just, yes, of course it's a problem, but the primary problem is not disinformation, which I'm against and I would help fight. But the primary problem is that the people listen to it because primary functions of their government aren't working, and they're asking themselves, why doesn't it work? And so you have to fix those underlying functions. Pretending that is the primary risk to democracy is totally a backfire move. Of course it's a risk. Of course it should be dealt with. Of course security services should fight this. Foreign influence into a country is illegal, unethical, and should be fought. And I would be happy to help out fighting that. But the primary risk to a society is not fake information. It's a society that's willing to believe the fake information because they're wondering, why doesn't my school work? Why doesn't my border work? Why have I been taught things in school that don't work? Why do I know nothing about software? Why am I being told that poetry will pay my bills when in fact it's not even good poetry? It's like that is the primary risk to a society. And all this other stuff is just a way of saying, I cannot deal with the primary problems. I can deal with the secondary problems, and it won't work.
I wish we had more time. We don't. We're out of time. Alex KARP, co-founder and CEO of Palantir Technologies. We thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Okay. That was good. That was interesting. Always lovely, in the words of the host, to hear from Mr. Alex KARP, co-founder, CEO of Palantir. Okay, so let's spend about 10 minutes to break down some thoughts and kind of go through what KARP had to say. I think at the end there, when he was trying to give the example around what he means by this kind of critique of Silicon Valley, I think that he didn't outright say it, but I'll outright say what I think he was trying to say in terms of his overall critique of what's going on in democracy. Because I think if he just outright said it, would have made it a little bit easier. He was speaking very academically, and I got a grasp of it. I'm gonna have to watch it again to even get a better grasp. But I think I kind of got what he's trying to say. Okay, so first, before I get into that, high-level thoughts. I think KARP killed it. I think he did a really good job. At the end of the day, he's speaking, I believe this is at the United Arab Emirates, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and he's basically making the argument that you need software to power not only a democracy, not only the values you believe in, but you need to be part of a technological revolution that makes sense. He's critiquing Europe in the context, and he's been saying this over the past couple of weeks now, even on the earnings call, that Europe is lagging on the revolution to embrace AI. And I think he's kind of giving a little bit of a whistle to the Middle East and saying, hey, you guys should not lag to this revolution. Asia should not lag to this revolution, because if Europe and Germany want to stand on their high horse and, be scared of what's going on with AI, then you guys can eventually, beat them. And but you got to be able to embrace AI. So I think the tone in the initial 5 minutes was kind of like, look, companies and countries are going to be slow to adopt this, and the ones that are slow are going to lose. That's it. They're going to lose, which is why he said the US is going to win, why they're growing 70% US commercials in the US year over year, because the US wants to win when it comes to AI. And I imagine governmental revenues in the United States in particular will supersede international government revenues. It's already doing that, but by a long shot over the next couple of months and years as the United States continues to embrace AI. So that was the first argument he made. Software is important, and we need to have an understanding of software. The second argument he made is about the moral questions of a particular argument versus the technological process or progress of that argument. So this is a good example to kind of define it. Affirmative action. The liberal sort of leftist case is that we should have affirmative action because there are inequities in society. And in order to recap for those inequities, we need to make sure that certain people have, an ability to achieve as much as other people have an ability to achieve, given that we start on like different playing fields, right? That's why we should have some type of preferential treatment towards people that have been discriminated against, that are structurally excluded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that has essentially gotten into the workplace as well with DEI initiatives, et cetera. And KARP saying, well, these questions of morality are questions that people care about, questions that people want to have answers to, questions that people think are incredibly important in our society. And he's not denying their importance. He's just saying sometimes these questions go against the actual progress we can make when it comes to implementing technology, because instead of getting the smartest people on a meritocratic level, you're worried about getting the most inclusive form of identities to be working on a subject, which might not be the best meritocratic way to solve that problem, which stops technological innovation and progress. That's one example off the top of my head, but I think that's the broader point KARP is trying to make, is that when you're so concerned about these moral questions and not concerned about the technological revolution happening that undergirds these moral questions, i.e., if we don't have an economy, there is no morality. This is Coinbase's argument, right? Coinbase's argument is that we don't give a shit about diversity. We care about economic freedom. And economic freedom is the foundational element towards anyone, black, white, gay, straight, whatever, having mobility in their life, particularly social mobility. If you have money, life is easier. It doesn't really matter what race, gender, like if you have money, things are easier. So Coinbase's argument is like, we don't give a shit about politics or diversity. We care about economic freedoms. I think KARP's making the same argument here in the context of technological revolutions versus moral questions that people are so concerned about when it comes to addressing, how we will think about tech going further, or morality intertwined with tech going further. Jack Perez in the chat says, the stance KARP took on morality reminded me of Thomas Sowell's work. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely, 1000%. It's a very classic liberal approach in terms of how do we think of technology and technological revolutions as we go further into, a new age of AI and how that ultimately impacts democracy writ large. Now, on his book about Silicon Valley, okay, this is where I think KARP just needed to outright say it. I think he was a little, not afraid, but hesitant to say it in a room filled with, quite frankly, Muslims. This was at the UAE, and I think he didn't exactly want to say, obviously, Palantir stands with Israel, and you've got Muslims that might love Palantir, but they also definitely hate that they stand with Israel. That's just how it is. It's been a conflict for a very long time. And so I think he didn't make the argument because it probably wasn't the right audience to make the argument for. And that's key to being a good public speaker, is knowing when or when not to make these arguments. But on the book, The Technological Republic, he's basically saying Silicon Valley is embracing thin half-lives. And then when the interviewee asks him for an example, he kind of rambles academically and it's good, but I don't think anyone walked away with a solid example of what the hell he means, right? What do you mean by, Silicon Valley is embracing these thin half-lives? I will give you two examples that I think he's trying to point at. The first one is Facebook. So I think, he kind of got to this by saying your intellectual capacity, your IQ gets lower as you embrace some of these tech companies. What he's talking about there is similar to what he said a year ago when he said, we're not trying to run to the metaverse. We're trying to solve problems in the real world, which was a banger by KARP, right? And the reason he said that, do we know when the book is going to be published? I think it's going to be published in May. I could be wrong, but I think it should be coming out later this month. Or not this month, later this year. What he's talking about here when it comes to we're not running to the metaverse, we're solving problems in the real world, is basically saying Silicon Valley has basically decided we are going to create trillions of dollars of value, And we're going to do it on the backs of advertising. We're going to do it on the backs of convincing people that they have to stare at the screen all day and they have to become, lab rats, essentially scrolling through all this type of stuff. And now, look, I think there is a lot of potential in a lot of these social media platforms and apps that exist. I think they democratize communication, all this stuff. But KARP's larger point is the best talent in the world is at Google, getting $700,000 a year, $300,000 in equity. So they're $1 million, they're a millionaire on paper. They feel great about themselves, but then they're working on optimizing ad clicks all day. And, it's same thing with Facebook, right? You're working on creating the metaverse. And KARP's larger philosophical point, there is a very good argument for why the metaverse is cool. But KARP looks at that argument and says, I don't give a fuck about any of that shit. Why are you trying to get people stuck in some VR fake world and reduce their intellectual capacity to become characters in some AI simulated reality, taking away their ability to go out into the real world, taking away their ability to socialize, all the downsides to what a VR metaverse reality could be. Apple is guilty of this as well, now with the Vision Pro, versus actually building something of value, right? And what defines value in KARP's argument, it's protecting the West. Now, why does KARP think protecting the West is more important than the metaverse? And in a nutshell, you may think, it's not that serious. We have to protect democracy, but damn it, we can make some spatial computing as well, right? That stuff matters. KARP's argument is no. Russia invaded Ukraine. China looks like they're going to invade Taiwan. We had a vicious terrorist attack on Jewish people because the values that are being permeated throughout our global society that are starting from the West, because the West exports our values to the world, sometimes forcefully, those values are being adopted and it's leading to bullshit. That's KARP's point. Because KARP's KARP's argument is people think becoming TikTok famous is important, right? People think that being in the metaverse is important. So KARP's larger point, and again, it's very academic because on the surface level, it's hard to grasp, but his larger point is that if we embrace these types of values that are half-lies in his vocabulary around what Silicon Valley is producing in terms of actual value, Google, Apple, etc., then those half-lies end up destroying our capacity to meaningfully do the things that matter, which is, in his opinion, protect Western values. You can either agree or disagree with that. But if you invest in Palantir, I think you would largely agree that this is a deglobalized world, a world that is becoming more deglobalized, and software is one of those things that is going to help bridge the gap between the deglobalization that is happening. We are not a globalized society anymore. China does not believe in democracy. Russia definitely does not believe in democracy. Maybe the United States is not the best democracy, but they believe in democracy. So KARP's argument here is that the half-lies that Silicon Valley exports across the world are BS. Here's another example. Google not taking up the Project Maven contract because some girls at Google, didn't get their Starbucks on time, and then they started protesting that the company was going to work on AI-based drone targeting. But they have no problem with making sure you act like a lab rat and you click 0.5% more on some ad that pops up when you search for Starbucks near me. So you go to that Starbucks versus that Starbucks. Like that is the hypocrisy that KARP is talking about in the broader tech ecosystem. And that hypocrisy is what KARP believes is worth fighting for. And so I think that's the argument he was trying to get to. Now, the second argument I think he's trying to get to is what's going on in America, particularly with the support for Palestine. So obviously, we're not going to get super into that very nuanced topic, but just one simple claim, I think, that everyone can kind of understand. The idea that Queers for Palestine is a legitimate movement, and it's becoming something that's like a mainstream thing. And then if you just peel the surface a little bit, you're like, wait a second, if you were queer in Palestine, you would be dead. That paradox that's happening right now in society, where you can say, I'm queer, I'm gay, and I want the liberation of Palestine. But at the same time, you don't realize that if you were in Palestine, you'd be dead. If you openly kiss the same sex, if you did any sort of, public affection, is this is, so KARP's argument is wait a second, this is a half-lie. This is bullshit. This is just hypocrisy. But we're not willing to call it out. We're not willing to say anything about it. Again, that you can critique the Israeli government, all that stuff. That's not the point. The point is, it's these types of paradoxes that exist throughout the fabric of Western society that are being exported across the world, and people are buying into this shit. You got Bernie Sanders and you got Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren saying that billionaires shouldn't exist, and they're they have a net worth of $200 million. It's stuff like this where we're declining in meritocracy. We are saying that free speech, shouldn't exist, or that there should be these arbitrary standards of what is hate speech. Like, who gets to define hate speech? I don't know, a bunch of people that sit in a fancy room in some White House. Okay, so now those people get to determine what hate speech is. These are not classical liberal Western values. And KARP's argument is like, we need to fight for these things. I think if he used the Facebook example, the metaverse example, and the Queer for Palestine example. Now, he probably shouldn't have used the Queer for Palestine example because you're sitting in a room with Muslims, so that would have been the best. But the metaverse example, I think, would have been an easy mic drop. He could have easily been like, you know what? Everyone wants to run to the metaverse. We're trying to solve problems in the real world. What happens when there's a global pandemic and your supply chain flips in seconds? What happens when you have the cure to cancer, but you can't organize your data in a sophisticated way to be able to synthesize all of those, billions of rows of data to be able to come to somewhat of an agreement in terms of finding a hypothesis that could theoretically be the cure to a disease, which is why they're working with Novartis, the fourth largest pharmaceutical company in the world. What happens when the airplane in the sky has a malfunction? And it was a very simple thing that you needed on Boeing. There was a screw that was loose. Oh, that screw was loose? Well, maybe if we had a sophisticated integrated system of software that can make sure all the vendors are systemized in a certain way, like Skywise, then your screw wouldn't be loose and you wouldn't have things happening on those airplanes that are bad while you're 30,000 feet in the air. These are the things that KARP and Palantir seem to be concerned about. Not to mention all the stuff they're doing with the government, right? Concerned about, actually on the battlefield, all that stuff that Silicon Valley writ large is not concerned about. Right. And so that is the issue in the broader ecosystem for what KARP is arguing for. And as a result of that, I think that's the argument that he is trying to make. Now, again, he made the argument academically. He didn't really make the argument kind of like spot on in terms of those very specific examples. And I think if he did, it would have hit home, because academically, even me, who, look, I would consider myself a little bit intellectual when it comes to this stuff, just because I've read a lot of the literature KARP's read in terms of, the philosophies he's gone through, like Hegel and all that stuff. But even I was just like, all right, this is a little hard to put together, right? So I can imagine the people there are kind of like, all right, what exactly are you trying to say? I think his book will do a better job of explaining it, because it's a complex topic. But sometimes if you just have simple examples to kind of hit the point home, we're not running to the metaverse, we're staying in the real world, that kind of makes up his broader point. Okay. And the last thing I want to say is what he said. Fake information is not the problem. The willingness to believe fake information is the problem. I thought this was also an excellent point by Alex KARP. So his argument is like, everyone's like, oh, misinformation is such a big issue. We need to solve misinformation. We need to make sure that people are not believing lies and all this stuff. And KARP's argument is like, wait a second. Solving misinformation is not the existential problem of our lifetimes. AI deepfakes are not the existential problem of our lifetime. The existential problem in our lifetimes is that people actually have a willingness to believe in these deepfakes, that people want to buy into bullshit, right? And that's a broader philosophical problem. That's not a problem that you can solve overnight. That's a problem that has to be solved from a sociological, cultural perspective. That's a problem where, elite universities that are training the next generation of the great leaders of the world have to think about it a little differently. Because if you're indoctrinating people to believe that fake information is the problem, it's like, first of all, what is fake information? Who creates fake information? Who gets to decide what's real or what's fake? How does AI play a role in all that stuff? These are important questions. But if these are the only questions versus the existential question that's undergirding all of those things as a byproduct of that undergirding of how fake news even happens, which is why would you believe this shit? That's a broader problem. If we see some random headline and we don't even click to read the article, we just believe the headline, which is kind of the culture that we're living in right now, that creates a society where you can have a lot of shit go wrong very quickly. And so KARP's broader point is that there are different things we need to work on, and AI and technological revolutions that are happening right now in regards to software, enterprise data, et cetera, that needs to address the heart of the problem. It's very similar to his argument about, I don't want to sell you software until you want to buy my software, which means you have to use my software, find value in my software, then pay for my software. And that's why Palantir is growing, because people actually want to use the damn thing because it makes sense. So that's ultimately, I believe, what KARP was trying to say. Word of the day: undergirding. Undergirding is a real word. It just means the foundation of. I think it sounds like it means the foundation. I'm pretty sure that's a real word. We'll see later if that's not a real word. But that's, I think, the point that KARP was trying to make. And I think he did a good job making it at this conference. Now, this conference, there's a lot of people that have a lot of money that probably are interested in Palantir. I would imagine he sold a couple of tickets to these boot camps at this conference by people that are at least interested in Palantir. And so from that perspective, I think it was a success, and we'll see now how they can expand and grow in the Middle East and everywhere else around the world. All right, that's it for me. Thank you guys for joining Palantir Deep Dives. This was awesome. This was super fun. We'll be back at this hopefully every day, 8 to 9 p.m. Tomorrow we have to read the Time article, which is basically a preview to the book. So we'll read that tomorrow from 8 to 9, and we'll analyze that entire article as well. So if you haven't read the article, you'll basically be hearing me read the article, and then we'll analyze it and talk about it as well. Okay, that's it for me. Undergird. It's a word, dude. It's a word. Undergirding is a verb that means to strengthen. Look at this. I was right. Undergirding. It's a word, a verb that means to strengthen, secure, or reinforce by passing a chain around the underside of an object. Okay, so I'm not talking about the chain stuff, but I just mean strengthen. That's what I mean, and reinforce. That's it. All right, everybody. I'll be on Finance Junkies in a couple minutes. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll see you tomorrow on Palantir Deep Dives, and Market Open, 8:45 a.m. Bye, everyone. Have a good one. Good night.